Guys that can make or break your fantasy league this year. Nick Whalen and I are going to be talking about a certain select group of players at each major fantasy skill position coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We're brought to you by Circa and Fantrax. Happy to do another edition of the Monday Football Podcast, and we're going to do a little unique version. We're going to be less on, emphasis on the news. We have one news item to talk about, but we're going to kind of talk about a certain class of players, the boom or bust players that can make your fantasy football league. Nick Whalen, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Jeff. I'm doing very well. You mentioned that, Circa is one of the presenting sponsors of this pod. Just locked in my flights for our trip out to Circa later this month. Always loved being out there. They've been so hospitable to us over the last couple of years. We'll be doing some live radio out there, so make sure you check that out over on Sirius XM. But you're right. I mean, normally we come back from a long weekend and we have all these news items to hit. I know we're going to talk about Alvin Kamara. We finally, after like 2.5 years, have some clarity on that suspension, how many games he's going to miss. But other than that, we've avoided like any catastrophic injuries over the weekend, right? We emerged from the Hall of Fame game mostly healthy. I think teams are kind of gearing up now, seeing a lot of shorter practices this week with the preseason coming up this weekend. But let's get into Kamara, and then we'll talk about some of our boomer bust guys.
Yeah, let's do that. So, Kamara had a very productive meeting with Roger Goodell and walked away with a 3-game suspension. I know many people thought that he'd get 4. Some thought as little as 2, some as many as 6. I personally, when I was setting my rankings, I had him as 4. So this is a little bit of a modest bump for him. I still think there are some other issues involved with him that make him still a boomer bust candidate. But, if you've already drafted Kamara and you got him as wide receiver, running back 35, running back 32, something like that, congratulations. You probably got an extra game that you weren't necessarily paying the price to get.
Yeah, I think you're right that most people were kind of in that 4-game range. And, when you're putting out a set of rankings, like your top 150 that you update weekly at RotoWire, it's like you don't want to be overly aggressive with a situation like this. Like, you don't want to be the one guy who has Alvin Kamara like 2 rounds higher than everybody else when you're ultimately just guessing at the length of a suspension. But yeah, so if you were planning on 4 games, you shave off one of those. That means he will sit week 1 against the Titans, week 2 against the Panthers, and week 3 against the Packers. Come back against Tampa Bay, and as long as he stays healthy, should have a chance to play 14 games. I think this is not quite best case scenario for the Saints, but it's close. I thought there was a chance with the plea, down from a felony to a misdemeanor, the chance to meet with Roger Goodell, that this could maybe be a 1 or a 2-game suspension. But ultimately 3 games, I think you're fine with that. If you're the Saints, you feel like you could survive a few weeks without Alvin Kamara. And, it's still really early. This ruling came down over the weekend. We've only had about 20 drafts or so go off since then in the NFFC, but we're already seeing him go on average about 8 or 9 spots higher.
Yeah, we are. So on the field itself, this is going to be his age 28 season. Turns it's turned 28 in July already. So this is kind of the point in time where a lot of running backs kind of have a little bit of a downturn. We saw a little bit of a drop in his receiving distance, which was excellent actually. 8.6 yards per catch last year, but still down from 9.3, 9.1 the years before. Targets, 2 years running have been kind of low, 67 and 77 respectively. We know you're missing those 3 games. He missed some games each of the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on him just on his merit, on his standalone merit?
In terms of Alvin Kamara, the player, I still really like him. I'm not too worried about a physical fall off. There's been some reports out of Saints camp that, when he's been on the field, he's looked like himself. He's looked really explosive. We're only talking about missing 3 games here, but he's going to come in fresh, right? I mean, that's 3 games that everybody else is going to be banged up. And he'll get a little bit of a late start, but, in theory, maybe that allows him to, kind of be healthier as the season goes along. I'm more worried about the targets, like you mentioned. I think he's still the same guy when he gets the ball, but you can basically draw a line and say, okay, here's when Drew Brees was the quarterback, and here's what's happened since. Right. And I think, we kind of make fun of Drew Brees for the way that he played at the end of his career, and it was still pretty effective, but he just couldn't throw the ball downfield. I think, one of the big side effects of that was it really benefited Alvin Kamara earlier in his career, right? I mean, he was the perfect guy to just stand there and take these dump offs from Drew Brees. And now that they're running like an actual NFL offense, we're seeing that regress a little bit. So I still think he's capable of being that guy. I don't know that we're ever going to get back to the days, where he's being targeted 100, 110 times, because that's just not how this team or any team really wants to play offense.
Yeah, I think that's right. I might not be in on the price, especially if it goes any higher than RB30 where he's already going. I for the reasons that, the reasons we talked about. You're not going to get goal line carries. Jamal Williams is there. That's what he does. They brought him in just for that. I think he's a better version of Mark Ingram, at least Mark Ingram 2.0, the one that they had last couple of years. But I think he's a real threat, and they drafted Kendre Miller as well. I think I'd rather have some of the other guys around him. I'd rather have Antonio Gibson. I'd rather have Isaiah Pacheco. I'd rather have a couple other running backs. Even some that go after him. I think I might actually have Rashad Penny. I know that might be heresy, but
better
offense. Where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on Pacheco. Alvin Kamara's got to go in that same zone as Gibson, like you mentioned, AJ Dillon, Brian Robinson, Samaje Perine. Like, I still like him over those guys. I think he's still, clearly the number one running back. Now, the Jamal Williams addition, that's concerning because, like you said, Alvin Kamara was already not getting goal line carries, and now you bring in like arguably the best goal line specialist in the entire league. So at that point, then you're really depending on some of those targets in the passing game coming around, because the days of Alvin Kamara rushing for 14, 16 touchdowns like he's done in the past, I don't think that's really realistic. But at the same time, he has 6 total rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. That's almost 30 games. So I think he can meet in the middle. Like if he can give you 900 rushing yards, 500 receiving yards, and 10 total touchdowns, I think that's a big time season from Alvin Kamara, given where he's at right now and everything that's gone on.
Yeah, I question the touchdowns. I really do.
Okay. Yeah, fair.
Yeah. So, I mean, he had 4 total last year. That's the thing. Right. Is I know we're not just basing everything on last year. We know we look at what he could do, but that's why he's a boomer bust player, and that's the whole concept of today's show is guys that could really, come through for us or really could sink us. They're not steady Eddie guys. We don't look at them as floor guys. We look at them as guys that have high ceilings and shaky floors.
Yeah, and a couple notes on methodology before we get in to our guys. We each did 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a tight end. We got a bunch of honorable mentions, so I'm sure we'll hit on as well. But you're kind of taking bust into context, or boom, I guess, into context as well, based on ADP. So some of these names are guys that could be going in the top 30, top 40 picks. And when we say bust, we don't mean that they just have like a disaster season and give you no value. It's like you're busting relative to ADP, or you're booming relative to ADP. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And then for me personally, Jeff, I did my best to avoid injury, boom bust guys, but it's tough. I mean, in the NFL, that's such a big part of, what causes a boom or bust season. So, I tried to work around it in some ways, but there are a couple of guys on this list that I feel like we just have to mention, and injuries are a big part of it.
Yep, absolutely. And let's jump right into that. Quarterback, this is one of those guys. Your guy here, Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah. I considered Deshaun Watson here. I considered Anthony Richardson, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford. I think there's a handful of quarterbacks really that you could choose from. Even Brock Purdy deserves a mention here. But I think it has to be Tua. And this was almost kind of a free space for me. I mean, we saw the stark contrast of what this offense was when Tua was in there and when he was not. And, I think there's a lot of trickle down here too, where, if Tua suffers another concussion earlier in the season, and all of a sudden he misses 3 or 4 games, not only is that going to bust for his own fantasy value, but it affects Tyreek Hill, it affects Jalen Waddle, it affects that entire offense. And I haven't been getting a lot of Tua. I like what I've seen from him. I've kind of had to do a 180. I really never thought he would even get to this level in the NFL. I was just not a huge fan. But we spoke with Mike Sando from The Athletic last week, Jeff, and the one criticism that everybody keeps coming back to with Tua is, all right, put the health thing aside. When he's out there, everything almost has to be scripted for him. And if it's not, then they can run into some issues.
Yeah, that's right. And we've seen that happen at times for him, and you're really taking away the running game from him now. You know, they're going to do everything they can to make sure he gets rid of the ball. They don't want him to scramble. They don't want to have design runs for him anymore. So that's one avenue of value that's taken away from him.
100%. I mean, they can't afford to let him run at all. I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. And, you know, everybody, you kind of have to dance around this topic just because of it's how it's handled. But I mean, he's legitimately like one real concussion away from potentially not being able to play football anymore. You know, that is, you know, I don't even, you know, with most quarterbacks, if you get a concussion, you're like, oh, maybe he'll miss a week or two. I mean, it's a whole different level for Tua. So I think that's something that you have to keep in mind here. I mean, he's going to inevitably take hits over the course of the season. We saw it happen 3-4 times last year. I mean, they absolutely need to find a way to do more than any other team in the league to insulate him and keep him upright.
ADP in the NFFC is QB 10. That roughly puts you, and that's a teardrop. You know, it's kind of in his own tier. Like Deshaun Watson's QB 9, and he's at around picks in the month of August. He's pick 76. Tua's pick 94. Dak's the next behind him is 104. So he's basically in his own round.
Yeah, he is. And I think that's fair because there's a lot of polarization around Tua, right? I think you have your believers, you have your skeptics, you have people like me that are just kind of worried about the injury situation and staying away for the most part. And that does create a gap in ADP. I mean, I would still rather have Dak Prescott than Tua. I think there's probably a higher ceiling with Tua just because of how explosive this offense could be, how quickly they could put up a ton of points. So I get it. But, you know, I mean, Tua was not a top 10 quarterback in terms of average fantasy points in most formats last season. So if you think there's another step to go up, okay, I understand that argument. But I think if you're Miami, it's like you're not even that concerned with Tua improving as a quarterback. I think he showed he was good enough for this offense last year. You're just concerned about it, keeping him upright. And as you could probably tell, I'm not super optimistic that he plays 17 games.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. The other boomer bust quarterback that we're going to talk about is essentially a free square. Everybody knows that Anthony Richardson of the Colts is a boom or a bust candidate. Great runner. Maybe, you know, he could be a top 5 running quarterback like immediately from day one. He also could be a benched quarterback. He might not even start over Gardner Minshew. Now, I've seen all the reports. He's getting the first team reps and all that. But Minshew has worked with the Colts head coach before in the past. So you've got that as a one factor. You know, it was a year ago that people were clamoring for Minshew to get a look at possibly starting. Yeah. Of course, that's kind of a joke now, but because Jalen Hurts was so awesome. But there was this like, oh, if he could only be on the right team, he should be a starter in this league as he drives his 1975 Pinto that he lives out of or whatever. But yeah, he's creating his own narrative there. Good, clean fun. But nonetheless, Richardson, you know, poor footwork on his passing. Short passes have been a problem, but man, what a running upside. People salivate over that rushing upside.
Yeah, I mean, my question is, assuming he starts, maybe it's not even week 1. I can't imagine he's not starting by like week 3 or 4 at the latest. And my guess is he probably starts week 1, given who the owner is and how much influence he's had on football decisions. I mean, can he truly bust if he has that high of a rushing floor, right? I mean, I think the boom is, you know, astronomical, especially long-term, you know, probably not his rookie year, but in terms of what he could be 2, 3, 4 years down the road. But if he's starting 16, 17 games, I mean, I feel like there's going to be a baseline, maybe not even of rushing yardage, but this is the type of guy, you know, frame-wise, who can, you know, kind of bully you inside the 5-yard line, you know, maybe not quite to the level of like a Jalen Hurts where you're basically just using him on QB dives whenever you're at the 2-yard line. But I think he's going to be a big-time weapon in the red zone. So to me, he actually has like a decent amount of variance here where like he could really struggle for the most part as a passer. But if he's doing enough as a runner and he's going off the board as like QB 16 to 18, I think just the rushing potential alone is going to give him a pretty nice floor as a rookie.
Yeah. I mean, I still think a rushing quarterback can bust. Justin Fields busted in his rookie year. I mean, I want year 2 of Anthony Richardson. I don't want year 1. I think that's kind of been my construction. He's getting priced accordingly in the NFFC where you have 6 points for a passing touchdown, where he's QB 17. Okay, that's fine. I mean, you're not starting, but I don't love carrying a backup quarterback either. That's another thing. I'd like, if I'm going to be drafting one of the top 6 quarterbacks, I'm probably not going to draft a backup now. That might be to my consternation with Joe Burrow, as we've seen right now. But I kind of the mindset that that's not a spot I want to be carrying. Now, if it's Kirk Cousins and Anthony Richardson, I think that's a more viable combo. where like, okay, you've got the safe guy, or you're playing the matchups early and you're hoping Richardson just really breaks out, and then you have two great guys. But I think that's another thing. I also like Richardson better in a single QB environment than a super flex environment where you have to start him every single week.
Yeah, no question about that. And I think you made a really good point that you kind of want to wait, obviously in a redraft league, for that year two breakout. If you're in a dynasty league, you got to make that pick this year and kind of, pin your hope to that upside. But like realistically, like how great of a rookie year would he have to have for you to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I passed on Anthony Richardson as my second quarterback on the bench. It's like, there's just, I think in a redraft league, it's like if you wait on quarterback and somehow Anthony Richardson is the guy that you're pinning your hopes to, and he has a great rookie year, that's a win for you. But he's not going to finish as like a top 5 quarterback, right? Like I don't think there's enough upside here to make you really have like FOMO if you miss out on him.
I think people are dreaming on Cam Newton or Robert RG3 in their rookie years, their seasons. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the dream on. But I think more realistic is like Lamar in his rookie year, where he shows some signs late in the year or whatever like that. I'm trying to think of other rookie, like, speed quarterbacks that, that fit that mold. For the most part, it takes a while. I mean, it's a hard position to learn in your rookie year, and let alone when someone, Richardson's case, where he doesn't have a whole lot of collegiate experience either. I think that's the other thing. The big takeaway is, he doesn't have that many reps, period.
Oh, exactly. And, I think the Cam Newton, RG3, those are the guys you're going to point to that makes total sense. But, those guys to me were much safer prospects. Obviously we had seen them do a whole lot more at the college level. I think they were more NFL ready. There weren't these like, just massive swings in terms of you're either in or out on him like you are with Anthony Richardson. So yeah, I think you only have a handful of guys who you can even compare to Anthony Richardson physically, which is a compliment to him. But I don't think he's in the right situation to have a massive rookie year. And I don't know that the Colts, I mean, obviously they want that, but I don't think that's the goal. It's not like get Anthony Richardson as many yards as we can. It's, this is still a very much a developmental, bring him along. There's no real expectations type of year for the Colts and for Richardson.
Absolutely. All of our podcasts are brought to you by on the Blue Wire Network. We are happy to be there. As a consequence, here are a couple of their ads. All right. Thanks for your indulgence. Let's move on to running back. Boomer bust. Who is your boomer bust, number one boomer bust running back?
I'm going to start with DeAndre Swift in Philly. And, you were going with somebody who is being drafted around pick 70 right now in the NFFC. So, bust for him is, really low upside. He gets injured again. And I don't necessarily trust that the workload is going to be there for a guy who has injury concerns separately. And like I said, we're trying to kind of stay away from that as the reason that somebody could boom or bust. But yes, he's in what might be the best rushing offense in the league, rushing offense that I believe had 32 touchdowns on the ground last season. But we know a bunch of those are going to end up in the hands of Jalen Hurts. You have Rashad Penny to do some work in the red zone. You still have Kenneth Gainwell, who every single year finds ways to make an impact. Boston Scott always has like 2 or 3 games per year. He's still on this roster. Like, I don't know that the Eagles are all that interested in having a designated number one running back. I think they love having this rotation. And I think this is a great spot for DeAndre Swift to land in terms of being on a good team, being part of a great system, a team that I think might be the best in the NFC and just has a case to be the best in the NFL. But fantasy-wise, I'm not in love with this landing spot.
I'm not either. I don't see a scenario where he ends up as one of the top 12 running backs. I guess there is. If, Penny gets hurt. Oops. I guess that happens all the time. Right. But Swift gets hurt all the time too. That's the other thing. And I don't think Philly wants a single back. They want multiple backs to contribute every single game. And that's why I have a hard time, clicking on him anything earlier than, RB. Well, RB 26 is fine where he's going.
Yeah,
that's fine. But he has partisans that push him up around the, his min pick area is like RB 17, something like that. Like I'd be hard pressed to take him over Joe Mixon. I really would. I can't think of, and that's not a Bengals thing. That's just workhorse, knowing he's the guy thing. I think I'd take Kenneth Walker, although we're going to watch out for his groin injury. This is a nebulous area of running backs, by the way. I mean, look at the backs between like Mixon, who I think is like the last like workhorse guy that we know is going to get stuff, but Kenneth Walker, Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders, Cam Akers, Damian Pierce, Alexander Madison, Dobbins, Rashad White, James Cook, and then Swift. I mean, there's question marks with every single one of these guys.
Yeah, no question about it. And I feel like I gave the bust case for DeAndre Swift more than the boom. And these are boom or bust guys. And look, I mean, the other side of this is, okay, the Eagles make a concerted effort to pull back on Jalen Hurts taking hits in the regular season. They reduce his usage in the red zone. They hand the ball off to DeAndre Swift. We've seen the upside with him, right? I mean, week 1 last year, 15 for 144 and a touchdown. Kind of felt like he immediately rewarded everybody who pushed him up draft boards. And then, he gets hurt in week 3. Never really felt like he was himself the rest of the way. Jamal Williams had established himself at that point. But even if you go back to how he started the 2021 season, I mean, first 7-8 games of the year, he's running the ball well. He's catching a ton of passes out of the backfield. Almost 9 yards per reception. He's hauling in 5, 6, 7, 8 catches every single week. So obviously Philly liked him for a reason. They brought him in for a reason. I think they believe that they can kind of recapture the player that he was to begin that 2021 season. So even though I might not believe it, I think there is still a boom case here. And a lot of it just comes back to he's in a really productive offense that's going to score a ton of points.
Yeah, that's a compelling argument for sure. All right. I was a little bit of negative Nancy on Anthony Richardson. I'm here to make the case for Travis Etienne. RB 13 right now, 40th overall in the NFFC. I keep hearing all this stuff about Tank Bigsby, the ill-named Tank Bigsby. He does not look like a tank, guys. And you'll be sorry if you draft Etienne. And I think he's an easy click in the 4th round. I think he is a tremendously easy click, as a matter of fact. Last year essentially was his rookie year, coming back from missing his rookie year with the Lisfranc injury. He had the high-profile drop and fumble in week 1. He did struggle with some fumbles. Yes, and these are not positive points. I'm going to get there. Don't worry in terms of making the case. I think he's got extreme big playability. Even with all of his issues, he averaged 5 yards a carry last year. You got an improved offensive line. You've got a team that is just brimming with confidence now. You hear all these positive reports that he's improved his pass pro, which I think is the one thing that kept him off the field on 3rd down a little bit last year. I think he is a 3-down back, maybe not at the same volume level as some of the others above him, but I think you're getting plenty of a discount for that. I think Travis Etienne is one of those guys that could be like a top 5 running back, and he's never going to cost you that much. I think there's a receiving upside that is unrealized at this point in time. We know he's got the chemistry at the quarterback. That is not a problem. These are things that I'm not worried about a little bit. Maybe you're worried a little bit about volume because they improved their wide receiver core. I'm not that concerned. They still are going to do that. Last year with the playoffs a game on the line, who got the ball? Etienne. Gutsy play call, and they trusted Etienne to make the play. He did make the play. Game over. They win the game. I think things are there. I think their confidence in him is sky high right now. And I'm on board with Etienne at that price.
Yeah, it's hard to find anybody saying anything negative about the Jaguars right now. It's like everybody's rising up draft boards. Calvin Ridley looks like the best receiver in the league. Trevor Lawrence has added 7 pounds of muscle, I just read this morning. So, yeah, it's very easy to get swept up in Jags optimism. My favorite thing that you said there was, the potential concern about targets for Travis Etienne. And, everybody's saying the right things as far as, we got to get him more involved in the passing game. We know that's part of his skill set. I just think it can't be any worse than last year, right? I mean, that's the baseline for me. And if more of those targets are going to Calvin Ridley, then I think you could basically lock in what Travis Etienne did on the ground last season, or through the air last season, which wasn't great, but it wasn't. You're not taking a 0 there either. I mean, 35 catches, over 300 yards, should have had 2 or 3 touchdowns, due to drops and fumbles that didn't end up happening. So I'm with you. I'm more on the boom side of Etienne. I don't know if he can get to top 5 running back. I think he would need some help in terms of some other guys getting injured, because I do think this is going to be a pass first offense. That's kind of how, when the Jags took off in the second half of the year, they just started putting the ball in Trevor Lawrence's hands, and a lot of good things began to happen. I know Doug Peterson, though, last week said Etienne could easily have a 1,600 or 1,700 yard season. We'll see about that. I don't know if the offensive line is good enough for that to happen either. But, we need to see it a little bit longer, I think, in Jacksonville to officially put them in this category. But, a lot of the things we just said about DeAndre Swift, it's like, good back in what should be a really productive offense in a bad division. There's a reasonably high floor, I think, for just about every key player in this Jags offense, just because I think they're going to score a ton of points.
They are. So he's a boomer bust guy, because I mean I do see a downside too. I mean Tank Bigsby could be a tank. He could take over third downs. If Etienne drops his first pass, or if he misses on a pass block early on and Lawrence gets crushed, yeah, that's going to cause him some time. But I mean I think that risk is ever present with every running back out there. So I think that can be overplayed. I have no problem with Etienne at price and even slightly above. I think if you go receiver to start, for instance, I'm happy with Etienne being my number one running back in that third round. Let's just put it that way. Breece Hall, what do you say about him as a possible boomer bust candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I this one's injury related. I try to avoid that as much as you can, but I think there's a serious boom potential with Breece Hall. That's why he's on the list for me. Is I think if this breaks right and he is healthy and he's back for week 1 and he looks like himself, it's really easy to forget, how much he was rounding into form before that injury last season. I mean, he had like 3.5 dominant games before tearing that ACL, and then the Jet season goes sideways. Obviously, the entire offseason is about Aaron Rodgers, and there really hasn't been any Breece Hall talk. Like, I think we need to issue a general reminder to everyone who watches football of like how good this guy looked before the injury. So, for the most part, I've been approaching him with caution. I feel like he's being overdrafted in some leagues. He's settled in around pick 40 to 45. He's going right around the Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon zone. I would rather have the known healthy commodities of that group than Breece Hall, but I'm also willing to say that of that 4, I mean, Breece Hall, if he's healthy and stays healthy, could easily have the best season.
Yeah, they could. They very well could. I think the elephant in the room is, do the Jets sign another running back? Do they sign Dalvin Cook? Do they sign Zeke? God, no. I can't see Zeke actually fitting with that team. Did they sign Fournette? There's a lot of buzz about Dalvin Cook to the Jets. What's your reaction to that?
Well, that plays into the bust side of it too, right? I mean, especially if you've been drafting in June, July, into early August, our favorite month. That's something that you probably weren't thinking about all that much if your draft went off on July 3rd, and now you could kind of build that in. But a lot of people are drafting earlier and earlier, so obviously if they add someone, especially if they add Dalvin Cook, and even Fournette to a lesser degree, because he's just one of those guys that just always finds a way to make an impact. He's not just going to be sitting there getting 4 carries a game. If they bring in somebody else, then that, injury aside, I think that's where you could see Breece Hall end up being a bust based on where a lot of people have already drafted him.
For sure. Spent some time talking Dalvin Cook. What about his brother, James Cook in Buffalo? That's my other boomer bust guy. A lot of positive buzz about James Cook in camp. Ken Dorsey, offensive coordinator, saying he could be a 3-down back. You got to work, obviously anything people say in August, our favorite month, as you alluded to, is something that, something you have to dismiss a little bit there. There's a lot of, a lot of fluff talk, for lack of a better term. But I like James Cook's skills. I know he got off to a bumpy start last year, but you looked at him at the, second half of the season, he was the primary guy over Devin Singletary more often than not, which is why they let Singletary go. Of course, the fly in the ointment is that they did turn around and sign Damian Harris, and that is problematic. But I don't view Harris as a pass catching threat at all. I think if you're looking, and I think when you're looking at running backs in this range, RB 25, 6th, 7th round, when you're doing things like zero or hero running back, James Cook is exactly the type of running back that I'm targeting for that 6th, 7th round running back.
Yeah, if you're looking for pretty immense upside in that range, he's the guy. He's the guy, right? I mean, everybody else has a pretty major caveat. Whether it's DeAndre Swift being in a 4-back system, or James Conner just being in a really bad offense. David Montgomery's in that zone as well. I mean, he could very well end up being the backup to Jahmyr Gibbs. Kamara's suspended. Pacheco, not really a pass catcher. So yeah, every other back, I think you could say you can make a case for why they could have a great season, but you're always going to say, yeah, all right, best case, he's probably borderline top 20. I mean, I think James Cook being in this Buffalo offense has a much higher ceiling. And, the Damian Harris addition does worry me. I think he's going to be a big part of this offense, but you alluded to the pass catching with James Cook. I mean, he had 2 games last season as the backup running back, where he had more catches in any game than Travis Etienne did last year, right? I mean, he had that big one against New England, 6 for 41 in that game. To me, that's really intriguing. And obviously we think of Buffalo as one of the best offenses in the league. They were fourth in scoring last year. Probably would have finished second had they actually played 17 games. They're right near the league in rushing yards, right near the NFL lead in rushing touchdowns, yards per attempt. And a lot of that is Josh Allen. But, same thing we said about Philly. At some point, Buffalo is going to want to reduce the amount of hits that Josh Allen takes. I mean, he was banged up for half of last season because he's putting his body out there. And I think he's further along. He's further along in that timeline to me than Jalen Hurts is, right? Usually you get 3-4 years of kind of playing like yourself before the coaches try to rein it in. Like, I think this is the year that they could really start to be more cautious with Josh Allen. And the player that he is, like, you're never really going to be able to fully calm him down. Like, I think that's what makes him him. But I think they're going to try to limit that as much as they can. And I think part of that is giving more of those, between the tackle bruising type of runs to James Cook.
I think you're right about that. I do think Harris takes some of the bruising runs. That isn't necessarily a drag on Cook's value. The one thing is the drag, though, is the goal line. Obviously, that's one thing that we were talking about that with Kamara. I mean, Cook may not get a goal line carry all year unless it's like a hurry up offense sort of thing. That's the scenario. And good for us is that the Bills do run a lot of hurry up there, so that he could be on the field like that. But that is the downside. That is that. And what if Harris just catches fire with the new team and all of a sudden that's it, and then Cook is buried? So that's the bust angle on that there. But I got positive eyes for James Cook. I've had him already in a couple leagues. I think I'll continue to draft him in some places.
Yeah, I mean, the bust side with him is just not that low, I guess, right? Because I mean, if you're going off the board as the RB30, RB31, it's like, okay, most teams are not staked to whether or not James Cook has a breakout year, right? So I view him as like, he's like 80-20 boom bust for me.
Right on. I'm in this same range for me too. Get ready for more millions guaranteed. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back and bigger than ever with 14 million in guaranteed prizes only at Circa Sports. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere. 2 ways to win and no rake. Play Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week with 100% payback to players. Grand finale winner takes home $1 million. Last place takes home $100,000 booby prize. With quarterly and full season payouts, $6 million is guaranteed. You can also join Circa Survivor to select one team each week straight up with no repeat selections. If the team loses or ties, the entry is eliminated. Each team can only be picked once in a season. Go 20-0 or be the last person standing to win it all. $8 million guaranteed. $14 million in guaranteed prizes. Visit circasports.com for details. We're talking boom or bust right now on the RotoWire podcast. Nick, let's talk about your first boom or bust wide receiver.
Yeah, I'll mention both of them right away, and list off receiver. We could talk about 30 guys here, but I settled on Jerry Jeudy and Christian Watson as the 2 guys that I really want to talk about. I'll say I gave heavy consideration to Deebo Samuel, Elijah Moore.
I looked at that too.
Yeah, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Those guys are kind of tethered at the hip for me. Devontae Adams, Jalen Waddle, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those were kind of the big ones that came to mind. But I settled on Jeudy. We'll go with him first. I actually was kind of surprised, and I went back and watched a lot of clips from Jerry Jeudy last year, dug in on the numbers. He had a better second half than I remembered. I think I just kind of got swept up in everything that was going on with the Broncos, and he actually closed the season pretty well, developed some chemistry with Russell Wilson as he started to play a little bit better prior to that late season concussion. Obviously he will be, to me, the number one beneficiary if you're a believer that Russell Wilson is going to get this thing turned around under Sean Payton. So, part of it to me is almost out of Jerry Jeudy's hands, whether this is boom or bust. It's kind of all up to Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. And honestly, I could see this going either way, right? We saw the downside of this Broncos offense last year. We know that Russell Wilson is a much better quarterback than he showed last year. We know that Sean Payton is a Super Bowl caliber coach. So you could really talk me into either of the extremes here. I guess I don't really see Denver just settling in as like an okay offense. Like I feel like Sean Payton's either going to get this thing turned around and they're going to be pretty good, or it's going to look a lot like last year. So I think he's the perfect boom or bust receiver.
Agreed. Got him in a dynasty league where I'm thinking this is like, I've been waiting for that payoff. And you're right about the second half. Remember, Wilson had a game against the Chiefs where he was like old school Russell Wilson running around like crazy, but then he got a concussion. And this is why he doesn't run around like crazy anymore also. But you could see like a little glimpse of, okay, this is what could be. And Jeudy had some big plays, and you don't always think of Jerry Jeudy as a big play guy, but he's had those in the past. Yeah, I think this is kind of a big year for him too. This is a kind of a prove it year for him, in addition to the rest of the Broncos. I was talking with Alan Seslowsky about Christian Watson earlier for a little short that we were doing, wide receiver short video that we were doing. And Watson, I mean, yeah, obviously we've seen the huge potential, the big plays that Watson has. He can take a slant like he did against Philly and make Jordan Love look good. Maybe Jordan Love will be good. Who knows? We don't really have a whole lot of data to go off of there. No. We kind of had the same seats his parents did in Kansas City and trying to watch what's going on with that. But Christian Watson, he could, I think Love could support him having wide receiver 2, even like bottom end wide receiver 1 upside.
Yeah, no question. And I still have more questions about Christian Watson, the player. I guess kind of untethering him from Jordan Love. Like, to me, that's not necessarily that big of a concern. I mean, some of the most memorable plays Christian Watson had last year were with Jordan Love, taking over in that Philly game. And I think you have to remember, like, as great as Aaron Rodgers is, to me, he's one of the 3 best quarterbacks of all time. He did not have a 3 best quarterbacks of all time season last year when Christian Watson made his debut, right? I mean, Watson had that just catastrophic drop week 1 against Minnesota and was basically exiled from the offense until like week 9 or week 10. I think it was against Dallas when he had that big breakout game around Thanksgiving. So like he's coming into his second year, but it almost felt like he wasn't even on this roster for half the season. He was banged up. He was kind of dealing with some soft tissue injuries, and the highs were extremely high, right? I mean, the Packers have not had a big play Hail Mary type of receiver like this in a long time. They've kind of leaned a lot more heavily toward the possession style of receivers that Aaron Rodgers trusts. Fitting balls into windows. Like they've never had this like straight line deep ball guy or somebody that you're running across the field on a reverse and he's taking it 60 yards for a touchdown.
Right.
So in terms of just the pure player, like he's just a boom or bust guy. Like it feels like everything's either a touchdown or a 2-yard loss or a drop. It's every single play almost feels boom or bust for Christian Watson. So yeah, I mean, if Jordan Love is an average quarterback and is like the 20th best quarterback in the league, then I think Christian Watson has a really good year, and the Packers probably have a chance to win 8 or 9 games and maybe sneak in as a wild card. If Jordan Love is bad, if he looks overwhelmed, if he's just kind of robotic out there, then I think Christian Watson is really, really going to suffer.
Yeah. And I don't have a whole lot of Watson yet, but that's also because I have like a couple preferences in the same range. Like I prefer Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore. But I'll say this, I'd rather have Watson at his price than Keenan Allen at his, which is about 10 picks difference. I'd rather have Watson than D-Hop. I'd rather have Watson than Drake London, 2 wide receivers that are going above him right now. I just think he's just a very intriguing guy, and I'm not quite sure what value exactly to put on him, but there's like I can see cases for and against him, and I guess that's the kind of the point of this whole exercise.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how much they get him involved. I was going to make like a Debo comp, and they're such different players. I mean, he doesn't run through tackles the way Debo does. It's not somebody that you want like carrying the ball per se, but I mean, they started using those jet sweeps like routinely later in the year. That's not something the Packers have ever really done. I don't think Rodgers really loved it, but it became one of their most effective plays. And, if this offense struggles under Jordan Love, how much do they try to get him involved as this gadgety guy, try to break off some big plays? That's going to be interesting to monitor. Watson versus DJ Moore to me is interesting. Why do you lean DJ Moore?
Stability. I just think that you're talking about a guy that I know is going to get a pretty decently high volume. I just think he's a very good player. And I'm Watson. I mean, Watson has the higher ceiling, I think, but maybe not. I mean, maybe Fields takes another step forward. I mean, we know about as little of Jordan Love, the passer, as we do Justin Fields, the passer. I mean, I think that's the tricky part about this whole equation.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Who are the receivers on your list?
Okay, so mine are a little lower. And they're diametrically opposite of each other. One is returning from an injury veteran who's done it before, and one's a young guy that hasn't quite done it yet, although he also is he was injured last year. And those 2 players are Michael Thomas and Jameson Williams. I mean, we're talking, old and new. Michael Thomas, wide receiver 47 in the NFFC, 98 overall. Williams, wide receiver 49, 105 overall. These are the in the month of August. So you're looking at two guys that are kind of completely different. But let's start with Williams. Williams, man, he's going to miss 6 games. We know this, and that's tough to stash. I think it's easier to stash in the NFFC where you have like 9 bench spots than say like your home league where you might have 5 or 6. I think it's a little trickier there. He's had like 1 reception. He had another long touchdown call back due to penalty, but we don't have a statistical case for Williams yet. This is all what might be. But we've seen that tremendous ability, that upside. We saw him drafted so early last year in the draft with a torn ACL, knowing that he was going to miss most of the year, and they still drafted him that high. I think this is a leap of faith argument, but man, I really want this second half of Jameson Williams.
I do. I have not found myself taking him anywhere. I actually think there's more downside than upside here. To me, I don't know if the 6-game suspension is being properly factored in for a guy who has exactly 1 NFL catch, as you mentioned. Is coming off of a torn ACL last year. I mean, within the last week, his own head coach was like, "Yeah, he needs to learn how to catch more." That's a bit of a problem for me. Like I get the upside, but he's still, I mean, he's so slight. I mean, even at Alabama when he was tearing it up, it's like every time he gets hit, you're like, geez, this guy, he looks like he weighs 160 pounds. I just think you're asking a lot for a guy who barely played as a rookie. Came in at the 1 long touchdown. I think a lot of people are clinging to that. He's now going through a full camp, which is big. He didn't get that last year, but you go through camp and then you have to miss a month and a half. You got to kind of come in on the fly. We'll see where the team is at that point. I mean, I think they play KC in Seattle the first 2 weeks. So, I mean, there's a route here in which Detroit, stumbles out of the gate like last year, and you're coming back into, a situation where you feel like you have to get up to speed right away. So I worry about Jameson Williams returning value. I know you're getting somewhat of a discount. He's going around pick 100, but 6 games is a lot of games, man. I mean, that's a third of the season for, a guy who we don't know. He's not proven that he can stay healthy, right? I mean, if he gets hurt on top of that, and then at that point you're looking at like best case is he plays 7 or 8 games. So to me, I just don't want to take somebody who I know for sure is already out for over a third of the season.
And that's fair. And that has a lot to do with your roster construction. Like I'm not drafting Breece Hall for the similar reasons, right? Sure. At least not at price. So I mean, we all have our things. I view him Williams as he's not hurt now. I think that is in the rear view mirror. That's the way I'm viewing that. So I'm not viewing that as a necessarily like in a heightened risk. I think he's got the same risk as any other NFL player in getting hurt at this point in time. Whereas Hall is coming back from something, and a far more recent injury. And that's the way I look at it. As far as the size goes, I mean, let's look at his college teammate, Devontae Smith. A lot of people said the same thing. And he's been durable enough to make it through the ringer so far, is now getting drafted in the 3rd round. Whether you're there for that is a point for debate. I know not everybody is. Smith. Yeah. So, but so, I mean, but the thing is, I mean, that was an argument against Smith. Sure. And I think Williams can overcome that. So, but I get it. And there are different ways to bake a cake. I think I want a little Jameson Williams as one of the ingredients in my cake. That's all. Michael Thomas, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. I mean, this is a guy who could be a top 15 wide receiver still. It is possible. He once was the wide receiver 1, but he's played 10 games the last 3 years. And they said he's working his way back right now. Obviously, all types of injuries have really ruined his seasons. New quarterback, though, I think actually, this quarterback is better than last year's quarterback for him. In the case of going with Derek Carr, so over Andy Dalton or a cast of thousands of others. I think we see less Taysom Hill at QB. I think that probably works in his favor a little bit, but I haven't clicked his name just once yet.
No, me neither, man. I'm out at this point. It's been too long. You mentioned it, 10 games in the last 3 years. I think if you want to make the counter argument, it's like before he got hurt yet again last year, he actually looked pretty good. We had 3 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks. And I believe he got all 3 of the Jameis games before they switched over and kind of became this rotating Andy Dalton door. Right. So I'm with you that if he could stay healthy, and you could argue that Michael Thomas is like the most injury prone player at any skill position in the NFL right now. Like we're in that zone. When you play 10 games over 3 years, there's no other way to really look at this. Right. If he can stay healthy, then there's a lot to like here. I think this is a better offense, a better quarterback for him. A guy who's played with multiple quarterbacks throughout his career has found ways to make it work. And again, last year still gave us a glimpse that, okay, he can be productive. He's probably never going to be anywhere close to the guy who was, bringing in 1,700 yards and almost 200 targets in 2019, but he could still be the number 2 guy in an offense that desperately needs him to be that if they want to reach their ceiling. But to me, this is just way too much of an injury downside here. I haven't really even considered it.
So those 2 guys are in the 47 and 49 range. You're not really interested in either of them. So let me give you some others around him and see who you'd pivot to instead if you need a wide receiver. We'll start a little bit above. We'll start wide receiver 43 is Brandon Cooks, around pick 92. Any interest there?
I would rather have Brandon Cooks than Michael Thomas. Yeah. I mean, number 2 receiver in Dallas, a guy who's obviously bounced around a ton, has been banged up, but not nearly to the degree of Michael Thomas. I would lean that direction. Yeah. I think you're looking at a higher floor there.
Yeah. I'll just better yet, I'm going to whip through a few names here and you can tell me what stands out. 44 is Quentin Johnston. 45, Kadarius Toney. 46, Zay Flowers. 48, Sky Moore. Just had a positive note, saw about him coming across that Twitter today. Juju Smith-Schuster is at 50. Romeo Doubs at 51. OBJ 52. Jacoby Myers is wide receiver 53. In that range, who jumps out to you, Nick?
Yeah, now we're getting into the range where it's like, oh, maybe I would take Michael Thomas over some of these guys. I've always been a Juju defender. Didn't really pay off for me last year. I saw some reports out of Pat's camp over the weekend that it looks like they have nothing close to a number 1 receiver on this roster. But I technically think Juju's going to be that guy, and that buys you some upside if you can stay healthy. Even if it's even if he's underqualified for that role, being the number 1 guy in an NFL offense means something. So he's probably the one that jumps out the most in that group. I'm not ready to trust Sky Moore yet. I hope it works out for him. I mean, he's in the best possible spot to do it with Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City. They have a reasonable draft investment in him. So I don't think after a disappointing rookie year, they're going to kick him to the curb by any means. But we've also heard, positive things about Kadarius Toney when he's healthy and Rashee Rice when he's healthy. And, this is like a 7 wide receiver group right now, and probably only 3 of those guys are going to end up being relevant. Obviously, Justin Ross has been a buzzy name over the last week as well. His ADP is on the rise. So, I don't read too much into it when it comes to Sky Moore, because I think this offense and Patrick Mahomes can make pretty much any of these guys look good.
And this is why I'm interested in Williams at this range, because I don't think there's a whole lot of impediment to him getting a role once he comes back from the suspension. That he, and the thing is, you're not drafting a season-long number when you're drafting this range. You're looking for guys that you can start. And I feel like Williams could be that guy that you could start. Whereas some of these other guys are just like bye-week fill-ins, or like, oh, God, I lost my guy. Maybe I'll have to turn to him, sort of thing. Whereas I think Williams is a guy that could end up being like a mainstay for your rosters. That's why I like drafting him in this range.
Okay. Yeah, no, totally fair. I mean, I think once you talk through the names that are going in that range, it makes more sense. I mean, it's hard to argue that Jameson Williams doesn't have more upside if things break right than most of these other players. I always love grabbing Tyler Boyd in this range. I know he's going a little bit lower this year, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Tyler Boyd has a higher ceiling than Jameson Williams for the last 10 weeks of the season. There's no way. The last thing I'll say about Williams is I want to see more than everything. Everybody says, he's this great deep threat, and I hope he is, and I think he will be. I want to see more than that, right? The one catch we've seen of him was like a 50-yard bomb. It's like, can he really give you anything if he's not running a go route down the field? Because, in theory, you feel like that's a huge weapon, but you're not going to be hitting those every single week.
Yeah, you got to be. Can he be trusted to get that first down? That's where, because that's where it's that bread and butter that you build off. Can he do the whole route tree? Yeah, absolutely. I get it there. You don't want James Trapp. You want someone that actually does everything. So there you go.
Exactly.
For you fantasy football players out there, is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current league? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters and customize if needed. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax Commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. If there's anything lacking in your current fantasy league manager, Fantrax likely has it. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/rotowire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league. You want to hit that Week 17 matchup against the Bengals and the Chiefs? Go for it. Plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right. Tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. I'm Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We're talking boomer bust players. We're on to our final position, tight end. We got a couple guys. You and I agree. We have a center square here. This is like the ultimate boomer bust player, Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, let's go right into Pitts. I mean, I think it would be really weird if we did this and just like ignored Kyle Pitts because it's too obvious. But yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate boomer bust, right? I think we have an all-time tight end prospect, a prospect who, as a rookie, showed plenty of glimpses and kind of delivered it, I think, on that promise, and then had one of the most disappointing follow-ups that any fantasy player has had in year two in a long time. And it ended with an injury. It was just kind of everything went wrong for Kyle Pitts last season. Even as it's not like the Falcons had a disaster season, right? I mean, they were in the playoff hunt like for the final 2-3 weeks of the season. The offense just kind of seemingly decided that Kyle Pitts was not going to be all that important. I would hope that they kind of learn that lesson and get him more involved. But the downside here is this is a run heavy team that drafted one of the best running prospects in recent memory. I don't think they're going to get away from that anytime soon. They have another big time target in Drake London in this passing game, and Kyle Pitts got hurt before Desmond Ridder took over. So I think it's fair to question what kind of connection that he has with the new starting quarterback.
Yeah, when healthy last year, before the injury, he was like spending 30% of the snaps off the field in 5 of his 10 games last year. And that's just kind of the Arthur Smith offense. That's one of the issues. And now they have Jonnu Smith, so maybe they have someone that can take care of some blocking issues. Maybe it just means, though, that Pitts is more efficient with the snaps he gets, possibly. I think the big question, though, is Desmond Ridder capable of supporting enough passing for both Pitts and, of course, Drake London to produce? That's why I don't have a whole lot of Drake London either, for that matter, because I have some concerns about that. Notice there are no other wide receivers that get drafted from the Falcons. It's really kind of crazy. They just it's really this big three plus Cordero Patterson still exists. I mean, that's still a guy that is a wide receiver in running back clothing. That's also a kind of a problem there for this offense, and just that huge commitment to the run. Tyler Algier is going to get some carries as well. He's not going to completely go away. You just know how committed they are to running the ball.
Yeah, I mean, the more we talk about this, it's like what is the boom case for Kyle Pitts? Like, if things go really well, it's like, does he really have like tight end 2 upside even? Because I just feel like in this offense specifically, like even if they make a point to use him better, it's like as a rookie, we felt really good about him. He had over 1,000 yards. He only had 1 touchdown. Like, I don't know if that's going to change with the way that this offense operates. Like, obviously they know the talent that they have in Kyle Pitts. It's not like it was a different regime, that kind of brought him in. Like, I think they understand what they have in him. They've just made a conscious decision, before he got hurt last year, to not use him in the ways that he's best utilized. It's a really strange dichotomy. Like, I don't really remember a situation like this with another player in the past. And, I think if we get another year like last year, where even if Pitts is healthy and he just kind of doesn't look like that same guy, I think this could become, somewhat untenable, at least from Pitts' side.
Yeah, I kind of agree. To that point, you listed another tight end that we're talking about, a boomer bust in Darren Waller, and I'm taking Waller over Pitts, and I don't really have a whole lot of reservation in doing so. I might take Dallas Goedert over Pitts as well, and I think I draw the line at Evan Ingram. I contract notwithstanding, I have some doubts that the volume will be there, especially with a better wide receiver core this year. But Goddard versus Pitts, Waller versus Pitts, I think I take both those guys over Pitts.
Well, when it comes to Ingram, I don't know if it changes your mind that I read this morning. He said that he thinks he and Trevor Lawrence could be the next Kelsey and Mahomes.
Oh,
So
well,
just
there you
something to
go.
consider there before you pass on Evan Ingram. Yeah, no, I mean, Darren Waller surpassed Kyle Pitts in ADP in the last week, which is interesting. That was not the case, through July and even early August, but he's now inched about 2 picks ahead of him. And, there really just hasn't been much Kyle Pitts news, good or bad. The last note that we have on him is that he was running routes at camp. That's good. He's a tight end. We need him to be running some routes as he comes back from that knee injury. But, we're getting a lot of positive news on Darren Waller. He looks great. Obviously that's an offense that needs him, right? Like if Kyle Pitts was traded to the Giants this offseason, I think we'd be ecstatic. Like that's a team that absolutely needs an infusion of talent at any of the pass catching spots. And Darren Waller, I think, is kind of set up to be that perfect guy. So obviously, you have some questions about Darren Waller's health. That's always been an issue. But if we're trying to put that aside, I think there is a big time boom potential for Darren Waller. And I think the bust side of things, of course, is the injuries, and maybe it's just some general regression from this Giants offense that the first 9-10 games of last year, it felt like they were getting every break.
Yeah. I mean, the news has been so good on Waller that I almost feel like we kind of forget how frustrating he was last year. It's just because he's been drawing rave reviews, uncoverable, favorite target. Look at those Giants receivers. None of them stand out. And, we've seen beast mode Waller. He can be amazing. 2020 was an incredible year. Kind of forget the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, last year it almost just felt like a complete incomplete grade. He played in more games than I thought, actually, but had a couple decent games early on, but never really looked like himself. I mean, I think if you're looking at the upside, you're clinging to those 2019 and 2020 seasons. And again, I think the Giants are not an exciting team by any means, really, outside of Saquon Barkley. He's like the only exciting player on this roster, but there is no team in the league, no decent team, I should say, that needed Darren Waller more than the Giants do. So I think they're going to utilize him. Like, I think it's a really good sign for him specifically, maybe not for the Giants as a team, but they had, I thought, the worst receiving core in the entire league last season, and didn't really do anything to address it. Like, Darren Waller's the solution for this team. Like, I think as long as he's healthy, he's going to see a huge workload.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I like him better than Hawkinson. I think Waller versus Kittle is an interesting debate because Kittle has his own health issues, quarterback concern. So perhaps a volume concern there as well. Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm good with Waller on some of my teams. He might actually graduate into that area where he might be a novelty luxury tight end that I'm willing to draft. Where like Pitts in that range, I'd almost rather just wait and get like Njoku later or get Ingram later or something of that nature.
I mean, you could get Dallas Goedert half a round later. You could get Evan Ingram, multiple rounds later. And I'm with you on Hawkinson, by the way. Like, fine player, just not excited about him at all. Definitely not taking him inside the top 40. I would rather wait, a round and a half and take Kittle or Waller there. No question.
Yeah. So there you go. Any other boomer or bust players we want to talk about before signing off here?
I think the only other names I had on my list, George Pickens, I think at receiver is, talent wise, obviously there's some boom potential there. Will he be held back by the constraints of Kenny Pickett and that offense, and being next to a target hog, Deontay Johnson. Michael Pittman was on my honorable mention as well. I think he's tied at the hip to Anthony Richardson. I think if he looks the part as a rookie, then I think Michael Pittman could be in for a bounce back. And then I don't know how I feel about these guys. They're on like the honorable mention, but Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, two really, really good receivers. Like, Mike Evans is on a borderline Hall of Fame trajectory, and it just kind of feels like we're kicking both these guys to the curb.
Oh, 100% agree. I just talked about Evans as a guy I happily draft as my wide receiver 3 or even a flex play, and he could be a top 20 wide receiver, no problem. He literally was a league winner in week 17 last year. He's got that potential. Obviously, the quarterback and the offensive line situation in Tampa is a big problem, but he's not getting sent off to the old folks farm here. He's still somebody who I think can contribute quite a bit. And last year's low touchdown number was a bit of an anomaly. So yeah, I'm all aboard Evans, especially at price.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the definition of a boom for Mike Evans is much different in 2023 than it was last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and really at any point in his career. Like, I don't think he has like top 10 receiver upside anymore. That's just not in the cards with what's going on at quarterback down there. But yeah, I think it's reached the point where he's become really underrated. Like last year, even they threw the ball a ton, and I think that ended up propping up Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to some degree. Godwin especially in PPR leagues, but I mean, it felt like Mike Evans had just a disastrous year from start to finish, right? Like you're just like, oh my God, I got to start him again. He had over 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns in like his worst case scenario year. And yes, I know that's Tom Brady, and you're going from that to Kyle Trask and or Baker Mayfield, and that really can't be stated enough. But I mean, honestly, if you just did like a blind test, like it felt like Mike Evans had like 600 yards last year.
Right. And because there were so many disappearing games, there was the high profile drop against Carolina. You get it. Same time, I think I'm on board again. Get me back in the put
at cost.
I'm back in. Yep. All right. Very good. We're going to end with agreement. I like it there. All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to Circa and Fantrax for sponsoring. Joe and Jake will be with you again tomorrow, every Tuesday on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for listening. Take care.